Hi, good morning and welcome to Hordle and Tiptoe online again. The spring is coming. The day that we're recording this, the sun is actually shining after some rain and daffodils are out and things are looking certainly better than they were 2 or 3 months ago. My guest this morning is Gary Price. Gary is Clerk of Works at Salisbury Cathedral. And I was introduced to him through Canon Robert Tytley, you may remember, that spoke to us about the work of the cathedral and his work in the cathedral before Christmas. And he said, you really ought to speak to Gary to talk about the building. Now, Salisbury is one of those great buildings that we have in this country, a real iconic building, beautiful cathedral. There's a great story to tell. Gary, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. This is great to have you with us. Clerk of the Works, I probably got absolutely no idea what that means apart from the guess that you have a responsibility for the building. I think the best thing I can do is hand over to you and say, can you tell us what your work involves and tell us a bit about the building and let's just sort of chat our way through. So thank you very much, and over to you, Gary. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So Clerk of Works, as you pronounce it, but it's actually, if you read it, it's clerk. It's quite an ancient title, goes back to medieval times.
Really?
And the Latin for Clerk of Works translates to clericus fabricae, or cleric of the fabric. Okay. And over the years, it's kind of changed to cleric of the works, and now it's clerk of the works. So it's an ancient title, and I'm very proud to hold it, to be honest. I've been installed into the foundation of the cathedral.
Really?
So I'm a member of the foundation, along with the chapter clerk, the archivist, the headmaster of the cathedral school. We can all process in services if we want to.
Oh, really?
I have my own seat in the choir.
Right.
Mine's right next to the headmaster's, but unfortunately, since this last year, we haven't been able to do any services. But yeah, so that's the title really, and it can be in various guises. It can be works manager, head of estate, director of works. There's a lot of titles, but they all mean the same thing. So in essence, I'm responsible for the fabric of the building, which would be the heritage crafts and skills. So it will be stone, glass, timber and lead. And as you progress into the modern age, we've got electrics obviously now, but we didn't have that when the cathedral was first built. So I'm responsible for the stonemasons, the glazers, the plumbers and the carpenters that are working on the cathedral. And we have started a major repair program back in 1991, but 5 years previous to that, so in about 1986 is when I started at the cathedral. So I started as a stone sawyer, stone cutter,
right.
And I would cut all the stones from the quarry blocks that you see on the back of the big trucks that drive around, big industrial diamond tip saw. I would cut them for the stonemasons to work. And then I would fix them along with the stonemasons. So for 25 years, this is what I was doing. And then there was an internal promotion, and I got promoted to Clerk of Works 8 years ago. And at the moment, we're working on the east end of the cathedral, which is the oldest part. So for those that you don't know, the cathedral, the first foundation stones were laid in April 1220. And this was a completely green virgin site. So what was here was very little. There was part of the bishop's palace, I think was 1219, and the cathedral started in 1220. So they start east and they always work west.
Oh, really?
So they started east. They built a small Trinity chapel, as it's known now. They would then seal off the end so worship can commence in the chapel. They then move their way west. And remarkably, they built this cathedral in 38 years.
Really?
From east to west. And that's just phenomenal speed. They had the manpower and the labor to do it. But it's the shortest cathedral ever built.
Really?
Yeah, and on a greenfield site. So, right. You know, generally you would have a monastery before or an abbey or something similar. that cathedrals add on to over the years, but this is in one period, early English Gothic, and they've completed at the west in about 1258 to 1260. And Salisbury had a short tower similar to Winchester's for about 50 years. And then they decided, I think there was a period of calm in the land, and they wanted bigger and grander things. So they decided to add a tower and our famous spire.
Yeah.
50 years after the cathedral was completed. But the extra weight of 6,500 tons, the original medieval masons who built the cathedral didn't plan on them somebody years later adding this extra weight. So there was a lot of complications. They had to add flying buttresses. They had to have blind buttresses inside the cathedral. They had steel work, various other things in order to maintain the integrity of the structure. The first 100 years, it did start to move. And it leans 27 inches to the southwest. Really? It's 2'3". It leans to the southwest. Yeah. And it's stabilized since then. And it seems, well, it appears to be okay. We have a structural engineer who carries out surveys. Christopher Wren came in the 17th century, right, and carried out a report. He was here for 2 or 3 days, I think. Wrote an in-depth report. Based on his report, the work was carried out shortly after he left, or in the years after.
Bit like a quinquennial then.
Yeah, I suppose it was really. And then Gilbert Scott came in the 1860s, and he strengthened the inside of the tower with diagonal bracing. He blocked up some stone staircase turrets with concrete and brick in order to strengthen each corner of the tower. And remarkably, it stayed in place. And I think partly due to it's made of stone as well, but the inside of the spire has got a timber structure which is attached to the cross at the top. Right. It's almost acting like a giant pendulum. Right. And keeping the spire in compression. Okay. It can get to 80, 90, 100 miles an hour up there on a stormy day.
Yeah, imagine.
So ours is the highest medieval spire in the UK now.
Really?
Lincoln used to be higher, and so did, reputedly, Malmesbury Abbey, not so long ago, was taller than Salisbury's. I think it was coming in at 500 feet, where ours is 404.
Really?
Because ours was built of stone. I think theirs were built of timber and lead, and lightning strikes, happen a lot to tall buildings.
Yes, of course.
And this was before lightning conductors were invented. So subsequently they caught fire. Right. And collapsed. And I think we were the second cathedral in the country to have a lightning conductor
really
installed. And the first one was actually Norwich, right, which is quite similar, similar in many ways to Salisbury. Yeah, so just to get back to the work in hand that we're doing. So started in 1986 as part of the Save Our Spire appeal. We enlisted the help of Prince Charles to raise £6.5 million for the spire and the tower and the west front, because these were the 3 worst areas. And the clerk of works of the time, Roy Spring, carried out a survey of the spire. And whilst he was abseiling down the spire, you could see daylight all the way through from one side to the next.
Oh, really?
The stone had worn down. It's 8 inches thick, the walls. The stone had worn down to 2 inches in places.
Oh, my goodness. Right.
Especially on the top decorative band. Yeah. And he wasn't exaggerating, but he said it was in danger of collapse, to be honest. So it was in a really bad state. So from 86, they built up the works department to to cope with the increasing workload. So we started on the spire. We worked our way down to the tower in 1990 to 95. And we had 23 miles of scaffolding all the way around the tower. So from here to Bournemouth in a straight line, if you like, as a crow flies.
That's amazing.
And then from when we finished the tower in 95, we moved to the west front. We worked on that for 5 years because there's 81 statues now on the west front. They all needed conserving and cleaning and repairing.
Right. Yeah.
So we had 12 to 15 conservators solely working on the statues for about 4 or 5 years. And we removed the scaffold in 2000, ready for the millennial celebrations.
Yeah.
And then during that time, we're also worked our way clockwise around the building, starting in the southeast transept, working our way north, west north. We're now at the east, which is the oldest part of the cathedral. And at the moment, we've just completed the high east gable.
Right.
And this gable houses the Moses window. Yes,
right.
Which was installed in 1781 by Pearson. John Mortimer designed it, I think. And the Earl of Radnor funded for the window to go in. And this window is exceptional from the inside. It was a groundbreaking design for its time. And it's sheet enamel crown glass, and the glass is 2 mil thick.
Oh, really?
And some of these panels are literally 2 foot high. It's still all leaded together, but it's not like a medieval stained glass window where you have small glass panels with a lot of lead.
Yeah.
And this window was removed in 1980 by the glaziers, our cathedral glaziers, and re-leaded and put back in 1981. But the window now, so 40 years later, when we turn up again to inspect and have a look, the window is too fragile to remove again.
Right.
For fear of us breaking the glass panels. And the painting on the inside is just exceptional. So what we've done, we've installed a hardwood timber frame, which is attached to the outside frame. And we're putting isothermal glazing on the outside, so toughened safety glass on the outside of the window, in order to protect it from the elements.
Okay.
And hope it will last for another 40, 50, 100 years.
So with that, it's effectively inside now, protected then. Yeah.
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 Just have a drink a minute.
Yeah. This is wonderful. I mean, your knowledge it's absolutely intriguing. Thank you very much.
And either side of the gable, a high east gable, there's a cross on the top. There's a pinnacle. There's a pinnacle each side, which is kind of like a small spire, really. And a pinnacle is there. It's a decorative feature, but it also serves a purpose. So a pinnacle is designed to force downward weight onto a structure, so to stop the walls from going out, really. So
right.
So when you put the the wood and the lead on the top, so that's what it's for. And there was a pinnacle up there that was in quite a bad state. We always get southwesterlies here.
Yeah.
And that pinnacle, actually, it was the northeast side of the pinnacle was so eroded away, we had to replace a lot of the stones.
Right.
So we had to dismantle the whole pinnacle. So it was 15 tons.
Really?
Bit by bit. We took it all the way down to the ground. We then took all the templates and the molds and made the new stones. I think there was 80 or 90 stones in this one pinnacle. We then took all of the stones up that we were going to keep and introduced new stones along the way. And there was one stone where there was 3 stones exactly the same weight. It's the lower castellation course of the pinnacle before it goes up into a spire.
Yeah.
So one of these stones weighed 375 kilograms.
Goodness, yes.
And we really struggled to get that up there in 2020.
Right.
So you really have to admire the medieval masons,
Well,
how they got, how they got that stone up there 800 years ago, 75 kilos.
Yeah.
With their limited technology, and we struggle with the technology that we've got. I mean, we did manage to do it.
A third of a ton. I mean, it's phenomenal, isn't it, what they achieved?
It is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, they wouldn't have had steel scaffold. They would have had wooden scaffold, probably wobbling around.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you really have to take your hats off to them, I must admit, And then on this elevation that we're working on, we've just finished it, actually. There was conservation to other areas. There was quite a lot of stones to replace on the high east gable copings that have eroded away. The hood molds that go over the stained glass windows, they always erode away quite quickly because they are there to throw water away from the stained glass.
Okay.
So we always replace a lot of these hood molds over the windows.
Right.
And we were just fortunate enough to get a cultural recovery grant for £250,000 to help repair the high east end of the cathedral, and we needed to complete it by the 31st of March, and the scaffold literally came down on Monday.
Oh, right.
So the scaffold's coming down now.
Right.
I've been up there today to have a look, and the stonework's lovely and clean, and everyone will be able to see it from the east as they come in from the town. And it will take about a month for the scaffold to come down.
Yeah, yeah.
We've still got the lower east end Trinity Chapel scaffold that we're working on.
Right.
And that will be in place for another year.
Okay. So, Gary, I mean, when you talk about this, and you talk sort of almost matter-of-factly about what you guys are doing, one of the things that really impresses me so much is the level of ability and the skill of your craftsmen. Obviously, you've come up that way yourself. How does someone get into it? Because you people are phenomenally skillful to be able to replicate all those crafts of that period ago in this age.
We do have an apprenticeship scheme, which we've had since I started. I'd say probably 20 apprentices have come through the ranks.
Right.
In the last 35 years. And 5 or 6 years ago, we advertised for an apprentice and 42 people applied.
Really?
So it's, so we were shocked that many people would be interested in stonemasonry. And it is coming more to the forefront now again. These traditional heritage skills are really coming back into favor, and people, would like to do stuff with their hands again and feel rewarded at the end of the day that you've put a stone somewhere that's going to be there for 800 years, or longer.
Absolutely. I mean, I was going to ask you about that because, I mean, we have these buildings now, 800 or longer years old, and with the maintenance, who knows what the future is, but obviously many generations. And yet we had guys with that ability all that time ago to do it. And it appeared that all these skills have been lost. So do you actually sort of have to work out how things were done along the way, or has that skill actually quietly been passed down?
Yeah, it has to some extent, and most of it was trial and error back then because they didn't really know quite. They'd build a vaulted ceiling in a cathedral or a church and it might collapse for any reason, and then they kind of figured out why it collapsed, so then they would add extra things here and here. So and now we have structural engineers who calculate every loading on everything, so less chance of things going wrong now than there was back then. But you kind of learn from your mistakes, if you like, and we're not
That's a good way to learn.
It is, yeah. We're not building a cathedral from scratch, so we're not putting one stone on top of the other generally, like you would build a brick wall. what we do now is we take a jigsaw piece out and we put a new jigsaw piece in that has to match the surrounding stones.
Right.
So that faces that's got its own challenges in itself, because we can't get lime mortar all the way around the back of the stone like they could do, because they was putting one on top of the other.
That's right.
So we have to face point the stone with lime mortar. We then leave the top bed without anything in it, and we pour grout in through the top, and it will fill up the void behind in order to keep it all in place. There are certain instances, like rebuilding a pinnacle, for instance, which is great because we can physically take all the stones down and put them all back in exactly as the medieval masons did hundreds of years ago. And also this pinnacle that we just completed, we put a time capsule in there.
Oh yes, yeah,
a proper sealed capsule that you can buy. We put there's a lot of words, a lot of text, a lot of photographs, all on archive paper, all rolled up nicely.
Wow.
So there's a photo of the current team who's working on the cathedral. There was some text that I wrote about the 2020 year, with the COVID and all the challenges that we all faced. I put all the stonemasons' banker marks on one document and put in there. So for those who don't know what a banker mark is, it's basically it's a stonemason's signature that they will carve onto their stone, and that's how they used to get paid in medieval times, by how many marks were on stones. Masons don't get paid like that now, but it's a tradition that's just been carried on. And all the banker marks are recorded through the Worshipful Company of Masons. And we often find, when we're removing old stones and we scrape off the lime mortar off of the joints, we often find banker marks, a half moon and a cross. We find a square and compass. We find some A's, and they're kind of a play on your sort of initials of your name, really.
Right.
But in those days, people couldn't really read or write, so it was a basic symbol that at the time nobody else had in the workshops. So then people knew it was theirs. If we find these marks, we always keep them. It's a great bit of history, and on one parapet wall we find 5 or 6 stones with the same banker mark on it.
Right. So that same person, they cut all those stones. Yeah.
And just to get back to the time capsule, we put a 2020 £1 coin in there.
Okay, right.
And a 2020 50p.
Right.
So in 500 or 600 years, when stonemasons turn up again, they'll be able to see the work that we carried out.
Yes.
And them coins might be worth a bit. You never know.
Yes. Absolutely. So that's wonderful. Can you tell me, how big a team do you have working for you? You mentioned other trades, other crafts, as well as stonemasons. You've got plumbers, you've got obviously carpenters, etc. So in your total team, how many do you have working?
I've got 22, including myself.
Right.
10 stonemasons, because the majority of the work is stone replacement, stone conservation.
Right.
Four glaziers.
Right, of course,
who will do about 15-20% of their work on the cathedral, and then the other 80 they source from outside jobs to local churches and stately homes, and they work on other cathedrals from time to time. I have one joiner, ecclesiastical joiner, one plumber, one electrician, a couple of labourers, and a groundsman.
Right.
And that's the entire team, and most of them are solely working on the cathedral, for 8 hours a day.
Right.
In the 1990s, we probably had about 55 people working in the works department, because there was so much stonework to do on the tower and the spire, and then subsequently the west front with all the conservation. But when once the west front had finished, we didn't need as many staff.
Right.
So in relative terms, 20 people compared to thousands when they built the cathedral, It's, you know, it's a drop in the ocean, but we're basically trying to keep the cathedral watertight so they can worship inside, you know.
It's wonderful. I mean, it's an absolutely iconic building, and it's beautiful. But it must be like the proverbial Forth Bridge, I guess, that you never ever stop having maintenance work to do. But you mentioned just now how originally they were built, and we can only imagine. But it would have been a whole community that would have been there for years building that cathedral, I guess, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there would have been huts all round the place. There would have been people down the quarry who were quarrying the stone. Some could have been working them roughly to rough shapes before they then bring the stone up here. And bearing in mind, the quarry is 12 miles away, so it's 60,000 tons of stone on Salisbury Cathedral.
16,000.
60 to 70,000 tons.
60, gosh, sorry. Yeah.
So if they were bringing a 1-ton block of stone up on a horse and cart or an oxen cart across the droves and various other roads, it would have 60,000 trips in 38 years. You know, even getting the stone here in the first place is a major achievement. And then you have to build it.
Yeah.
And then the other stone we use is Purbeck.
Oh, yes.
Which most people know. It comes from the Isle of Purbeck. And Salisbury has more Purbeck on it than any other cathedral in the country.
Really?
And the Purbeck columns that you see inside the cathedral were all worked by hand and polished, you know, all these years ago. And some of them are 8 to 10 feet high, these columns.
Yeah.
And Purbeck goes up as far as Durham, maybe Carlisle. You know, it goes all around the country, Purbeck. So it's a very famous, well-renowned stone. It's really good for columns and capitals and abacuses, and also paving in cathedral flooring. You know, there's a lot of Purbeck on the floors in a lot of cathedrals.
Really? And that was a lot further for it to come too. A lot further. Yeah. There's so much about the building which is fabulous, but I really do need to ask you this question. The font absolutely fascinates us. I can't remember when we first came to the cathedral, but years ago, and recognized it. And I recognize that I mean, you'll know all the technical side, and you explain in a minute, but to me as a layman, it appears to have that infinity pool ability. The water trickles out all the way around. For those of you who haven't, perhaps, if there's anyone that hasn't been to Salisbury Cathedral, I recommend that you do. Perhaps you could just sort of give us a bit of a description about how that was originally put in and the problems that you faced and how you've got it, because it really is spectacular, isn't it?
Yeah, so this font is the largest font in the country. It's bronze. It's kind of, the plan is in the shape of a cross with the edges curved. And at each cardinal point, you have a spout coming out. And like you say, it appears completely flat across the top. And in actual fact, some people have seen visitors and tourists putting their bags on the top of it.
Yeah, so I've heard. Yeah.
Because it just looks like a table.
Yeah.
But it was installed in 2008, designed by William Pye, and the excavation work was incredible. We had to dig 2.5, 3 feet down in order to put all of the pumps in, the underground water, the drainage. There had to be a watching brief kept by our cathedral archaeologists, because obviously if you're lifting up slabs, you can uncover various tombs and such like. But it is such a brilliant feature now, I must admit. When it first went in, it was quite controversial.
Really?
Because, well, it's change. You know, it's an old building. Generally, people don't really like change. But, you know, now it's probably one of the best contemporary things that's been installed, you know, in our cathedral. So it is wonderful.
Well, it is fascinating. As a person who does like to do practical things myself, I look at it and I think, because the level has to be absolute perfection there, otherwise the water would all run out in one corner. And it's beautiful, and it does actually really draw everyone into the centre of the cathedral there. We're talking just a little bit about figures. how much does it cost to actually maintain a building of that size? Because I know now that we're obviously all hoping that buildings will be able to open up, and there must be a massive deficit for Salisbury and all the rest of these historic buildings, which is going to have to be made up. So, what is the overall running cost of keeping the maintenance and everything going there, Gary?
So since last year, obviously, when COVID struck in March, we've lost 2 million in visitor income over this year. But we're not alone in that. I mean, all cathedrals have, there's a lot of businesses have gone, and so it's really quite saddening, really. We were lucky enough to receive some grants from various organisations.
Right.
So, the future is brighter, shall we say. And the cathedral, when it's open to the public, costs around £15,000 a day.
A day?
Yeah,
really?
That's all paid staff wages. It's gas, it's heating, and it's all of the costs, really.
Yeah.
And if we're working on the fabric as we have been doing for the last 35 years, it fluctuates a bit, but generally it's about £750,000 a year is spent on the fabric of the building.
Really?
And that's mostly through donations.
Really?
Yeah. And a really good fundraising team. I come up with a sponsor a stone scheme, so people can have their initials carved into the top of the stone and placed in the cathedral. They get their name in a ledger book. They get to go on the scaffold and see their stone. They can come into the workshop.
So in 500 years, when that one gets replaced, their name comes back out again then?
Yeah. So there'll be their initials along with the banker mark of the stonemason who carved that stone. Right. So it's a great scheme. A lot of people sponsor a stone in memory of somebody, and that's raised nearly £250,000 over the last 4 or 5 years. So that's so it all helps. We're trying to promote the department in special ways. We're running stone carving courses, and we run behind the scenes tours, which we started in July last year, and then there was another lockdown, so we had to cancel them. But they're going to start again once we're allowed to open. Right. So the cathedral is due to open on the 17th of May. God willing, as long as the COVID stays on the lowdown and everything goes to plan. So that's what we're preparing for now, really, the 17th of May. And at the moment, we're doing a project on the cloister entrance.
Right, yeah.
Cloister entrance is quite high. It's difficult for disabled access to get in and out of. Right. So we're working on it at the moment with the stonemasons, and we're lowering the threshold, paving it with Purbeck inside and Forest of Dean paving outside, just to make it more accessible, so people can flow in easier as well.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing that when next we visit. So yeah, that's great. Gary, that has been a fascinating tour around. Thank you very much indeed. I know that obviously you guys will be really, really waiting for the time when the cathedral opens. I'm sure that we'll all be looking forward to the opportunity to come up to Salisbury, which is a lovely city to come to in any case, and come and visit you again. I really do thank you very, very much. We have learnt so much from you through this chat. Thank you very much. And I think that probably some people are looking and think, right, I wonder if this guy would come and talk to an organisation or whatever. Do you actually come out and speak to organisations?
Yes. Yeah, I've done lots and lots of talks to various historical society groups. I've done lots, yeah.
Okay.
So please get in touch.
So anyone can. Well, I can pass your details on. Anyone that's asking through myself, or else obviously approach the cathedral. You're Gary Price, you're clerk of the works, so we now know what that is. You even have your own seat in the cathedral, so that's a wonderful piece of history. Yeah. Gary, I do thank you very, very much indeed. Absolutely fascinating. I had no idea that where it was going, and that there would be so much history and so much interest coming out. I thank you very much for your time indeed. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. You're very welcome.
Well, thanks a lot.